Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. My guest today is Rebecca Shaddix, founder of Strategica Partners, Forbes technology contributor, and one of the sharpest voices I've encountered on the real cost of success in high-performance environments. She's led product marketing at scale, advised growth stage tech companies across multiple verticals, and created over $450 million in measurable revenue for clients. But this episode isn't about results, it's about reality. Because Rebecca didn't build her philosophy from books. She built it from burnout. In her upcoming book, Billionaire, she unpacks the dangerous myth of productivity and reframes it not as something to manage, but something to reclaim. Through micro moments, identity shifts, and brutally honest decision making. We're not talking about time hacks. We're talking about letting go of the hero complex, unlearning the need to feel essential, and confronting the pseudo-productivity that's killing clarity in high-stakes leadership. And we'll explore her insights from Forbes on acceptable mistakes, the strategic trade-offs that leaders must embrace if they want to scale without stalling, and why, in an age dominated by AI, staying grounded in intentionality is the real differentiator. This is a conversation about autonomy, ego, and building systems that make you scalable, not sacrificial. So what's the story behind the story? Without further ado, let's get into it. Rebecca, welcome to Extrology. Great to have you here as our guest.
It is great to be here. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Well, let's dive in. I want to start, if you like, with, I guess, something that intrigues me personally, given that I've built what I would describe as systems that scale, but nearly cost me my health. In fact, in some ways did cost me some significant health challenges as a consequence. And I want to know how others have survived that season. So if I look at what I know of you, you've led at scale, but where did it break?
Yeah, I would say my approach to thinking about time intentionally came from it breaking massively and royally. And when we think about balance, I think it's very easy to get caught up in thinking there needs to be balance in a given day. But we all do have seasons where I'm a recovering workaholic and a recovering people pleaser. And so that leads to a lot of burnout. For me, it was the unwillingness to say no to good opportunities that led to that break. There were lots of really wonderful career opportunities that came my way that I was so excited by and didn't want to say no to any of them, which meant that I was saying no to something else, but it seemed like an easy trade-off. And that's something that I've really come to appreciate, is that there's no neutral time. If something isn't adding to our life, it's detracting from it, even if we can't see it directly. And so for me, it came from just working too much and too many hours, and it always being easier to compromise me time working out, time at the gym felt indulgent. And so sitting felt productive because I could get a lot of work done. It really broke for me with this unwillingness to say no to good opportunities, to think holistically about sustaining long-term consistency instead of the short-term intensity bursts.
How much of that was kind of early career, I don't want to say naivety, but actually understanding what a good opportunity was? They might all well have felt like good opportunities. I'm sure they were, but actually there is a moment in that early career where you are there's a lot of stuff to find out, even with great mentors, people who will guide you. Mm-hmm. There is it's the burden of ambition, I guess, but that desire to succeed in whatever that means to you personally makes it very difficult to know what to say no to. And it takes, I think, some experience, not necessarily always good experiences, but it takes some experiences and maybe getting burned a few times before you can acquire the knowledge to know, or even to guess what might be something to say no to without significant negative consequences.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think that's the operative point, right? Without significant negative consequences, because there's a downside and there's an upside to everything. And weighing that while something could be a good opportunity, you may want to speak at that conference, etc. there is no single career defining moment or opportunity. So being holistic about the weight of what we have right now. There's a thought exercise that I learned in business school from one of my favorite professors, Hal Hirschfield, who is a great author as well. And he talks about the fact that we tend to discount how busy our future self will be. We tend to think, oh yeah, that's a great opportunity. I want to speak at that conference 3 months from now. I'll say yes. And so the thought experiment he has is, if you wouldn't be excited to do it next week, you won't be excited about it. Your future self won't be excited about it. So learning to appreciate that future self is not going to be less busy or have fewer opportunities has helped with that pacing a lot, and without the overcommitment of the future self.
So was there a moment for you when you realized that being busy was making you worse?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd say for a long time, being busy felt effective because, especially early career, it does take longer to learn how to conceptualize things, how to do things. And so for a long time, working 14 hours a day, 7 days a week felt like it was effective. I was getting promoted quickly, had really great opportunities. It felt like it was working. It's the personal trade-off costs and really articulating my own values of what mattered to me that started coming into play a lot, reading different books about what people tend to regret. And it never is that they didn't work more. And so when I thought about my future self and what I was setting my future self up for, all of it was a life that had a deep, rich, personal family, friends relationship. And that's what I realized I was giving up. I completely lost touch with a lot of my good friends just because it seemed indulgent to prioritize dinner or a phone call, etc. And I still do think that there's ways to maintain those relationships. They don't take quite as much time. And that's what I started to appreciate really intentionally during COVID when I started working remotely and realized that a lot of those built-in opportunities to catch up, grab coffee were suddenly gone. And I was just on my device all day. That it doesn't take grand hours-long meals to maintain relationships. I keep a stack of stationery on my desk and I just write cards when I think of friends and mail them. So there's this physical reminder that I'm thinking of them. And it doesn't take more than 5 minutes. I can do that between meetings to just say, hey, I was thinking of this fun memory or a trait of yours that I admire. And I'm working on embodying patience right now. You're a really patient person and I appreciate that. Hope you're having a great day. And I stay in touch with friends all over the world, a couple of whom are actually in your neck of the woods this way, because time zones don't line up. Social media tends to drain me, but it's easy to just drop a card in the mail to my friend in London and just say, hi, thinking of you. Hope you're well. And so I've come to appreciate it doesn't have to be quite so I'm all in work mode, I'm all in personal mode, I'm taking time away from this work event to prioritize personal. Those can really be interwoven much more intentionally in ways that feel really energizing. So I can't remember the last time I went to the gym to work out. I don't have a gym membership anymore. But I do about 100, 150 push-ups and 10, 20 minutes of planks a day, 10 at a time, a minute at a time. It doesn't take any extra time. To me, that's really energizing to break up the monotony of sitting. And I've come to really appreciate that the balance can be a lot more interwoven into the time that we already have than we'd like to think.
I love the idea. One of the things that strikes me is broad sweeping generalizations about the 7-8 billion of us on this planet clearly ought not to be very helpful, but nonetheless, we seem to have lost the art of the handwritten note. I think there is nothing more beautiful or meaningful or thoughtful than a handwritten note. And yet it strikes me as I'm trying to recall a time when I have a tendency to write in books. So if I will write in the inside cover of books, I'm thinking of a few books that I've bought for people over the years that I've written a note inside the sleeve. But I'm trying to think when I last wrote, and I always write inside the sleeve of a book, but I'm trying to think when I last hand wrote a note to someone that wasn't a birthday card or something of that sort of nature. That's really interesting. Was there you mentioned COVID. Was there a season for you that forced you to rethink your relationship with time? And was that COVID? How did that come about?
Yeah, I think COVID was the forcing function. So before COVID, I worked in person, which meant I always got out of the house at least Monday through Friday pretty easily because I would go into the office, have in-person meetings. And it wasn't uncommon to spend an hour plus a day when I was living in LA driving, when I would call my grandparents, listen to an audiobook, actually have a breakup in my routine, grab coffee with a coworker in person. So the pace felt like I was getting a lot of these doses of connection and physical exercise and learning opportunities that were sprinkled throughout my day, sort of already pre-planned because I had my schedule and my routine and I had to commute. But then suddenly that stopped. And so suddenly I went from my bedroom to my desk, didn't really move much at all for the entire day. And I could go from a Zoom meeting, have 5 minutes in between, check email because I thought it was responsive, not really have time to answer those emails. So I was just context shifting from the meeting, context shifting into the slew of emails that were now all sitting in my brain, but increasing the cognitive load because I didn't have time to answer them. So I didn't get them off my plate. They were just sort of percolating. Oh, did I mark that one odd and red? I don't want to miss that. How do I want to respond to this? Context shifting into the next meeting, rinse and repeat. And I was constantly drained by this, but really not productive. It was not productive to think about an email 3 times before I finally responded to it. It was actually more energy to make sure I marked it as read, was kind of thinking about it. My response didn't meaningfully change. And I just felt this pressure to be constantly connected and responsive and prove I was available and reliable. So all of this signaling just really was draining and made me much less effective. I was running a strategy consulting firm at the time. And so I was constantly feeling this pressure to myself to show my clients I was available, etc. But none of that led to better outcomes. They wanted meaningful, strategic work they couldn't do on their own, not frequent email responses. And so just pausing and reclaiming what started just as the gaps in my Zoom meeting, go outside, take a deep breath, brew a cup of tea, and do push-ups in the kitchen while I was doing it to just compete with myself for how many I could get done in that time. That was instead of just sitting there scrolling on my phone, which, especially at the dawn of COVID, sort of felt productive. I thought I was staying in touch with the news and any new regulations that were coming out. But realistically, what was I going to do about it? I was sitting in my house. I was quarantining. This was not productive. So this barrage of information I thought was my way of being a responsible citizen, staying informed, staying connected, responding to my family. But it wasn't. It was just constant deluge of information that didn't add value. And so just interrupting that, reclaiming really what was just Zoom meeting breaks was the first step. And then I started listening to audiobooks in 5-minute intervals during some of these breaks, which led to completing dozens of books a year, all of which added to my thinking. And then I started focusing intentionally on well-being, time management, mental health, and read some fantastic books that really shaped my thinking about how to be intentional. And through all of those books, I've read maybe a couple hundred at this point in the 4-ish years since I started doing that. Just really thematically, what it takes to have a meaningful, good life started to emerge. I started noticing that reflection and mindset were common themes through all of these books, all of these time management experts were talking about. Connection with people, meaningful personal connection was another one. Physical movement was another one for our mental health, for our physical health. And that was something that was hard for me to prioritize because at the time I felt like I had to do an errand while I was walking or bike while I was walking to make it a worthwhile use of time. And so just realizing that it was a productivity tool. And then, so the connection, the cards came from that, getting access to nature, all of these themes started emerging from the research. So I just started collecting lists of things that I could do in this time that weren't scrolling my phone by default, which was my initial habit. And I found that replacing a similar dopamine hit was really helpful. So the scrolling, picking up the phone as an instinct to scroll in an app, I would just then intentionally choose a different app. So I would open up the Libby app on my phone as opposed to Instagram. And so just being mindful that I already had that motion, I was going to reach for my phone, I knew it, but when I picked it up, I could replace that. Online shopping was another one. I was just compulsively online shopping for these quick dopamine hits at the time. Replace that with going to my local library and checking out a book so I could hoard these books. I could go stock up on 5 new books, 5 new dopamine hits, but it still felt productive and aligned with my values of what I wanted to do at that time. And I found so much more energy and meaning and connection and fulfillment, and ironically, more productivity, even though productivity wasn't the overt goal, as I started making space for the things that I knew I wanted to do in my life, but had just been filling time with email scrolling.
What do you think that high performers get wrong about productivity?
I think we constantly think that working harder is always the solution, that if we have a problem, throwing everything we have at it intentionally to overcome it with intensity, we tend to feel like that's the solution. And so when I was feeling like I didn't have enough time in the day to do the things I wanted to do, because I was doing the things I had to do, I was just throwing more sleep less, work harder, focus more, Pomodoro method, time boxing. I was just throwing more and more systems of the delegate, delete, defer. I was just throwing more and more systems at the problem. The problem wasn't the systems. It really was just my mindset about the time that I already had. And so I realized that I was prioritizing scrolling email, scrolling whatever social media app I happened to open at the time. That was a priority to me at the time, and I didn't want it to be. So instead of working harder, I just had to replace something that wasn't a priority with something that was. And it became really easy to maintain by default, like unintentional. I don't have any craving whatsoever to scroll Instagram. I literally can't remember the last time I posted there because it just isn't aligned with my priorities anymore. But there was a time when I was just practicing scrolling for hours a day, and it was not making me feel better. And it was starting this downward spiral of I felt drained, so I felt more tired, so I felt less engaged, so I felt less agency over my time, rinse and repeat. Interrupting that was literally as simple as just physically standing up from my desk and removing myself from the scroll. And I literally just have that on my desk. It just says stand up, because I found that the quickest way to interrupt that pattern is I may not feel like I have time, but if I have 90 seconds, I have time to stand up, stretch, and sit back down. That alone is enough to interrupt that cycle.
So it intrigues me as to how you distinguish real output from pseudo-productivity. As somebody that's chased productivity like a drug to my detriment, I think at times in my past, I'm intrigued as to how you make that distinction between real value, real output that is impacting you positively and you're getting real leverage, real traction, you're moving things forward, versus just doing stuff, which I think is a trap that we all get caught up by at some point. How do you make that distinction?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say that Fridays at 3:15 are the way I consistently do that. I have that on my calendar as check-in time. And so that's when I check in on the wildly important goal, the one goal for the week. How did that go? How am I trending toward it? And the acceptable mistake of the week. So what's something that is fine to do mediocre or not at all because it won't threaten the outcomes? Did I prioritize effort toward the acceptable mistake, which I shouldn't, at the expense of the most important, wildly important goal? And so that's a check-in that's pretty quick to do. I also typically do once a day at lunch too, just a priority of the day. Am I trending toward it? If not, why not? And that's what prevents this urgent from coming up of the most important thing today is to finish this chapter in this book. If I'm not trending toward it, why not? Oh, I prioritized editing a podcast. Why am I doing that? Oh, it feels like a quick dopamine hit. Replace that with something else. So it's a pretty quick feedback loop of we have an acceptable mistake that we don't want to put any resources toward because it's not going to compromise our bigger success. We have a single most important goal for the week, and there's really quick iterations of am I trending toward that? I do that daily in 5 minutes, and then weekly because I can get back on track in a week. And then just being gentle about the why, being really curious about why not. So if the answer, and it often is no, I'm not trending toward my most important priority to be done by the end of the day, why not is really a curiosity of what is getting in the way, not I'm so terrible, I don't have any discipline, what's wrong with me? And so I think that the mindset is really important with how we do this with compassion. Is if you've articulated this, and it's also possible that you'll decide that something isn't a priority. And, oh, I thought last week that this was the biggest priority, but now I've replaced it. Also fine. And so just building the flexibility of the thinking, the self-compassion into the reflection is a pretty continuous feedback loop that I had built in to corporate life of if you have deadlines and you miss them, people will notice. Building that into my personal routine too, of my personal creative goals, has just kept them on track too. and made me really energized because I have this log now of all the things that I've accomplished that I found I was typically forgetting. That, yeah, I had my Asana board. Okay, it was gone. It was done. I never looked at the completed cards. I was always focused on what was next. But reminding myself, hey, look at all this great stuff a year ago. Well, look what I was worried about. And now it's so obvious and intuitive and part of my daily routine that I don't even think of it as a goal anymore. I have these logs now that make the wins compound and bigger. So I get the benefits of doing the things I prioritized, but also the benefit of feeling good about how I've done that. And so it's just this compounding growth piece of confidence. And my sister told me something a week ago that I really liked. She said, you know, you're making growth when you wouldn't trade places with yourself from a year ago. And I found that to be a really compassionate framework for how I look at what I'm worried about, because we're never going to get to a place where there's no problems or no challenges. Whatever we're all consumed by is just the challenge of the moment. And looking back at things that I was worried about a year ago and how they haven't even crossed my mind because they're already so done and overcome, that just continuously builds that confidence. And I'll build that into that check-in routine once a month or so, just to randomly flip back and see, what was I worried about? Or this time, this date, a year ago, what was I thinking about? Oh, that feels so small. I've overcome all of it.
How do you think managing micro moments has transformed your day-to-day clarity and therefore your leadership?
Yeah. So I think that thinking about these micro moments, the 90-second to 15-minute gaps between these structured parts of our day as opportunities for agency is just continuously reinforcing this confidence I have in controlling or changing any aspect of my life. So I think when I was in the habit of, I was just sort of a default slave to my technology. I would scroll because I always did it. I would check emails frenetically because I felt obligated to. It really was reinforcing this idea subconsciously in my mind that I was just sort of a passive consumer of other people's expectations of me and demands, etc. And breaking myself out of that can happen dozens, hundreds of times a day because, oh, I have 30 seconds to decide what I want to do with it. Great. It doesn't take any longer to stop in the sunshine, breathe, take a deep breath on the way to take the trash in or out, as it did without doing that. And so it's just built in this continuous confidence loop of, I think I had a little bit of learned helplessness of, I was a very good, obedient, docile student. And I was like, what do you want, teacher? I'll do it. Of course. I would never, ever have asked, like, why do we have to learn this? That was just not ever something that would cross my mind. It was like, oh, okay, the teacher wants us to do this. Yes, of course. Let me do it with gusto. And coming into the workforce of like, hey, manager, what do you want from me? Doesn't work as you're trying to scale your impact and your manager doesn't want to tell you all of these things that they expect from you. You have to know it. And so just this like looking around like, hey, family, manager, clients, boss, husband, are you happy with how I spent my day? Have I done enough for you? That was really just a default mental track of like, how do I make sure I've people pleased and achieved and like done enough? And breaking it up and realizing that it's not selfish or self-indulgent to just say, instead of frantically checking my email while I'm sitting in, I don't know, the doctor's waiting room, I can take that moment very intentionally to meditate, to listen to 5 minutes of an audiobook, to send a text to a friend about something I appreciate about them, to learn something on an app I've chosen. These are all moments that didn't take anything away from the wasted time I was already just throwing away, but it was already there. And so it's mine. And this continuous reinforcement of I get all the benefits of more exercise, more movement, more connection, more learning, more reflection. So I get more effective as a person, but I also get to reclaim agency over how I spend my time. And by extension, what I do with my life all the time throughout the day without any extra effort whatsoever. It's actually easier.
The thing that strikes me about what you describe is this sense that you're having to unpick, I'd imagine, some significant hardwiring, right? So the kind of operating system default was one of people pleaser. What are you saying yes to? Rarely saying no to. I recognize a lot of these traits. I'm sure there are many listeners that do. So how do you sense check that? To your point, you sat in the doctor's office, the instinct to pull out the phone and check an email versus recognizing, no, that's not what I need to be doing. Actually, what I do need to be doing is texting my friend that note about them, whatever it might be. So the self-awareness you've developed has to be, I would argue, or I would suggest, has to be profound. How have you gotten that? What's been the journey to get you to that point where you sense check that, no, not email now. This is about my friends, or it's about meditating, or it's about mindfulness, or it's about, but it's not about email, whatever it might be. How have you gotten to that point?
Yeah, it really starts, there's a couple of realms of this, but it really starts with self-compassion. Why did I have that urge to check email? Oh, I'm feeling anxious about being away from work in the middle of the day at 2 p.m. Is that a rational thought? No, I've put out of office. People understand that I'm gone. Okay. What did I want to do with this time otherwise? And so for me, committing in advance to how I like to spend certain blocks of time is helpful. So things that are sedentary, I know that I like to listen to audiobooks. So it's just a default committed in advance habit now. So I'll catch myself very compassionately. Oh, what is that revealing about what I'm concerned about? Okay, what did I actually decide was more aligned with my priorities? Right. Let's just switch over to the audiobook. And it's pretty gentle, and it just reinforces that there's a reason that we're doing all of this. It replaces that high stakes thinking that I think I was very prone to, that everything I did had to be excellent, it had to be done well, or it shouldn't be done at all. I had to maximize every second. And if I didn't work out for 40 minutes before work, then I didn't have time for that longer shower. Like, it was just so high stakes. And I realized it's just not that deep, right? Like, no one cares. You're not going to remember a week from now. So, like, whatever. You scrolled, you decided that you did want to scroll social media to see what your friends were up to. Cool. Just make sure it's curated with people who are aligned with your values and you want to be connected with and follow. And if not, okay, just don't follow them anymore. And so all of this is just really replacing this high stakes performance, almost thinking of myself as a resource. Like, I have 24 hours in a day. I better decide how to use all of them. Oh, I didn't sleep very well last night, probably because I was so anxious. Well, then now it's going to, like, it was just all so contrived and self-critical. And it is not that deep. It doesn't matter. Okay, you scrolled for a little bit, fine. If you did that because you thought it would make you feel more connected, or it was reflective of a habit, or it was built off of something that you thought was beneficial, cool. What does that tell you about what you value? Shift. It is just like accepting that I'm not a failure or lazy or any number of mean names I would lob on myself because I didn't do something perfectly. It's just a question of, how do I want to experience that time?
I love this concept that you describe of the time billionaire. If perhaps we've a listener out there who's very much recognizing in themselves what you're describing as perhaps some of those, because I don't think it's unfamiliar to many people, this sense of always on, particularly in the culture in which we find ourselves, and this sense of there are always things to do, or that feeling that there are always things to do. And I agree with you wholeheartedly, actually. In reality, how many of them will you remember in a week's time? I think that's a great way of looking at it. But explain, if you will, if you could please, this concept of time billionaire. If I'm a busy person, I'm on the brink right now, right? I'm maxed out. That concept of time billionaire, I think, is beautiful. What does it mean?
Yeah, so this is the concept I first heard from the investor Graham Duncan on a podcast. The idea is that if you have lived 31 years or expect to live 31 more years, 31 years is roughly 1 billion seconds. But a lot of us waste time in ways we would never waste money. The analogy I like to use is like, if you had no idea how much money was in your bank account, because none of us know when we're going to die, right? You have no idea how much money is in your bank account. Buying an expensive pair of uncomfortable, unflattering pants that you hate, you wouldn't do it. Or food, really expensive food that you don't like the taste of that makes you sick, you wouldn't do it. But we do that with our time, right? We spend our time on things that we know doesn't make us happy, but we don't know how much we have left. And it's ultimately the one thing that you can't get more of. It's non-renewable. You can't replace it. And all of this has compounding benefits. And so appreciating that I have lived 1 billion seconds. I expect, fortunately, to live 1 billion more. And I get to decide with all of those how I want to spend them and how I want to use them. And ironically, to your point, research shows that the more money we make, the more time impoverished we feel, the more we feel like we don't have
Yeah.
enough time to get done everything we want. Because quite literally, our time actually does become worth more financially, because on an hourly rate basis, if you were to think of it that way, if you were to put an hour more into work, it actually is yielding more money for you, the more money you make. And yet we feel more time impoverished as that goes on. And so just defining wealth and success for myself as appreciating the moment and appreciating that there is no neutral way to spend it, that if something isn't adding to your life, it's quietly detracting from it. Like clutter in your house, it may feel harmless, but it's taking some of your peace. So really just stripping that out so it was aligned with my values was very important to me. And I am very much a lifelong deferred gratification. So I would defer the heck out of fun in the summer to study for the SATs in middle school, and like just stupid stuff that was just like, yeah, of course it'll be worth it because then I'll get it to a college. It'll be worth it because I'll get to a good job, good grad school. And so then I found that I have never been more stressed than I was as an undergrad because I wanted my GPA to be good for grad school. And then I was super stressed about getting a good job and good internships and maximizing my research opportunities. So then I just kept deferring and deferring and deferring and deferring and saying, oh, it'll be worth it one day because I'll have X, Y, or Z. I'll be able to go camping without worrying about money. I'll do something that matters to me. And I realized the things that actually really mattered to me were right there, super accessible. The only thing that actually really mattered was things I already had access to, that I could go have a really close, meaningful connection with somebody whose values I shared and appreciated. And it didn't have to take all day. It could be voice notes back and forth. And so just appreciating that I have arrived. And I had this thought. My sister lives in New York City, and walking from her apartment to the office I used to work in would take me past Ellis Island. I could see the Statue of Liberty. And I just thought of my great-great-grandparents coming over, very little money, lots of things they were fleeing persecution, etc. If they could hear me ask the question, does this job fulfill me? They wouldn't even comprehend it, because to them it would be like, fulfill you? Can you eat? You sound pretty filled to me. And so it's just thinking about how much indefinite delayed gratification there was, that they were willing to leave their whole family and start over in a country that language they didn't speak. Their maximum, their goal for what a good life looked like is so much lower than my floor. Like my life could never get as hard as their life could. And looking back even at royalty from a couple hundred years ago, they didn't have indoor plumbing or electricity or access to books like we do. Like we literally, our floor is so much better than the ceiling for most people who have ever existed. And yet we're just like constantly anxious of like, am I doing enough, achieving enough, getting more? More what? More stuff? You don't need it.
The one thing that strikes me about what you describe, and the thought that keeps coming to my mind, is how this forces us to re-examine our relationship with death. And that might seem like a strange pivot, given that we're talking about
No, it doesn't.
the day-to-day. But actually what you describe, I read something recently that, and this was a UK specific statistic as I understand it, but so post Second World War, average life expectancy of a UK male was 47. Today it's 78. So we've virtually doubled average life expectancy of the UK male. Now, part of that, I suspect, without digging into the data, is determined by the number of it would have been predominantly men, but the number of men that would have been killed in battle during the course of the Second World War. That would have definitely, many of whom would have been very, very young. So that would have had an effect, but not that dramatic that it would have gone from, if it went from, I don't know, 50 to 47 or whatever. But the average life expectancy was not much beyond the age of about 50 for most Western men.
Mm-hmm.
And we're now, that's nearer 80 now. So we've quite literally virtually doubled average life expectancy in the last 70, 80 years. We've quite literally, to your point, never had it so good, right? From a health perspective, although we have enormous health challenges for sure, but medical science has developed to such an extent that we're all living longer. So why are we therefore in such a rush That's the thing that strikes me, is that despite the fact that we are, to your point, we don't know how, none of us know. None of us know. We might think we do, but none of us knows how long we've got. And yet statistically, we've got twice as long as we had 80 years ago. And yet we are in twice, three times. I don't even know what the data would tell us how much of a rush we are compared to our grandparents, but we are in such a rush. And that's really interesting to me as we talk. I'm struck by thinking, do we ever really address, and is it is it a Western thing? I don't know, but our relationship with death, is that something that is informing this, that we don't actually address it, we don't look at it, that we're fearful of it? I don't know, but I'm intrigued to, I don't quite know where I'm going with this, other than it just fascinates me to start to unpick that a little bit. Is that part of the problem?
Yeah, it's such an interesting point. There's actually two things that jumped out to me as you were talking. This rush you talk about, that's the piece of advice I would give my 20-year-old self, is there is no rush.
Same.
I felt such a tremendous rush to figure out what I wanted to do with my life.
Absolutely the same. I couldn't agree. I was going to say exactly the same thing. If I look back now, I have a 21 and my daughter just turned 23 this week. So a 21 and a 23-year-old, I've had exactly that conversation with them both of late, that if I reflect back on me at that age, I was in such a rush. And what I now realize as I look back is I had all the time in the world. What was I rushing for? And actually, what did it cost me? It cost me a lot.
That's right. Rushing to what?
Rushing to what?
Exactly.
Just
what did it
great
cost
point.
you? It's so true. And I think even just the open-mindedness that comes from that, you lose with that rigid thinking. I wrote my college applications essays on the fact that I'd known exactly what I wanted to do with my life since I was 8 years old. And then I got my dream job, and I really did not like it. I didn't thrive in that environment. And literally at 23 years old, I felt like a failure because my whole identity had been wrapped up in this definition of success that I had picked at 8 years old from somebody else's value system and definition of success, and then committed my life to. And I literally felt like I was starting over because my education at that point had led up to it. So I was like, what am I going to do? Pivot into a field I have no expertise in? Of course, that's what I was going to do. That's heck what I just did now after spending over a decade in tech. It's true. And I think this idea that we have to rush to some predetermined destination guarantees it's going to be a mediocre destination at best, or somebody else's definition of success, which is a surefire way of being miserable, right? Chasing somebody else's definition of success, bummer. That is not going to lead to happiness. And so what are we rushing toward? It's not happiness. We're rushing past it. We're rushing toward what? Some predefined peak that we have no idea how it's going to feel. Why? And I even think too, Lee, your point about life expectancy and what it does, I think we tend to talk individualistically about what that means. We all get to experience more in life. But if the life expectancy is 50, 47, whatever it is, that has significant impacts on the family structure and your friends' experiences. And so if you expect your brother, your cousin, your dad to die before they can meet your kids, that's a whole different experience with people and connection in the world that we all get to take for granted now. That fortunately, my grandparents live into their 90s, which was amazing. And that meant that they got to come to my wedding. They got to meet my husband. What does that mean for his understanding of my family and our dynamics of, I know who his grandparents are and how they've shaped him. And I don't have to just listen to stories. I can see and hear their values in my own experiences and have my own experiences in relationship with his grandmother, who's very similar to me. And then he gets to learn things about his grandmother through me because she and I get to enjoy avocado on a meal that everyone else thinks is disgusting, and quilting in a way that no one else appreciates. So he gets to learn about his grandmother because I got to meet her. That we didn't have that when we didn't expect our grandparents to meet our kids. And so, yeah, that's just a whole different wealth that we have now in modern society that's never been as good. And when's the last time you called your grandparents? It's just, there's so much that can come in. And I say that hypothetically or rhetorically. Calling my grandma is a micro moment for me. So I talked to her yesterday, but it doesn't have to take very long, right? I used to think that it had to be this whole drawn out half-hour conversation, but it can be 7 minutes at a time. And I learned just last week where she went to camp as a little girl and how she started playing tennis. I always knew she played tennis, but I didn't know that she had gone to camp in Reedsville, Maine, at a camp that still exists that I may want to send my kids to. I didn't think to ask her that. And so the fact that I get to be an adult with a living grandparent has such a richness on our life that is so easy to just overlook. And there's so much richness in our modern life that we forget or overlook. I don't have to boil water to take a shower. I don't have to lug buckets upstairs. There's so many privileges that come with that. And we often we think about tech, and it was the internet for a while, then it was mobile devices, and and now it's AI. We talk about it freeing up so much time to do more, but it just has consistently increased the pace of what we expect. And I think we have that opportunity to reclaim that. And that's what I like about micro moments is that I have the opportunity to opt out and reclaim the appreciation for the sun hitting my face, the appreciation for the fact that I can get strawberries from Argentina when they're out of season, and how many people were involved in producing them from made out of, like, everything you're looking at is made out of atoms that have always existed since the dawn of the universe and will always exist. And they could have been part of a dinosaur, and they could have been part of a black hole after we're gone. And the atoms themselves have no idea what they're part of, but they're all in service of this bigger connection. And it's easy to overlook and forget that as we focus on, oh, it's spoiled or it's out of stock, etc. Like, we have so much connection now, but we've forgotten really like the root of what makes us happy.
Your 4 principles: don't sit on the bench, internal versus external, empowerment versus fear, take up space. Talk me through them.
Yeah, those are my core principles that I use to make all decisions. And I've refined them over time as different things have mattered in and out. And there's certain things that are just so core to who I am that I haven't bothered to articulate them, like have integrity, make decisions with integrity. I'm always going to do that. So it didn't matter to articulate it. But these are the ones that have been important to me to define as core principles, precisely because they have been hard won. So don't sit on the bench is an analogy that my husband came up with when he was in high school. Really great athlete, always has been. Really short too. He was about 4'9" as a junior in high school. And so he never got to play, even though he would outshoot, outdefend, outperform his teammates in practice. And so one day he just decided that he was done sitting on the bench. He had no idea what he was going to do with that extra time. Being on the basketball team had been a big part of his identity. It looked good for colleges. And so the decision to quit the basketball team at the time felt like just a net loss. It felt like he was giving something up with no idea of what would replace it. But he did it anyway because he decided it wasn't aligned with his values to just sit on the bench when he knew he was capable of more. And with that free time, he started making videos. And that's how he started coding. And now he's a software engineer. And had he not been a software engineer, we never would have met. And so that's a principle that I've used for hard decisions that feel like I'm giving something up, specifically with jobs. And I used this one. I found that I've never regretted a decision I've made with any of these core principles. But when I think of each decision as a one-off to make without the core principles, they take longer and they're harder and they don't make me as happy. So I was in a job that I was just really not happy in. It wasn't aligned with it wasn't a good values cultural fit. And the definition, I was in product marketing. The definition of product marketing as I saw it was deeply strategic, deeply impactful, deeply empathetic, and customer centric. And it just wasn't appreciated. That work wasn't appreciated at this company. And so I was essentially sitting on the bench because I wasn't using skills that I had in service of what I saw as performative politicking of like just looking good internally. Most of my time and energy was going to looking good internally. And so I sort of like weaponized gratitude myself for a long time. Every day I'd say so many people would be so happy to have this job. They would love it. It's prestigious. It pays well. It's remote. It's backed by these big investment firms. It's growing. It looks so good. So many people would be happy to have this job. And I used that for a long time to sort of guilt myself into not being happy in it. Until one day when I thought about it through the lens of don't sit on the bench. So the reason this is relevant is because when I was sort of weaponized gratituding myself into thinking I should be grateful, when I ran it through the lens of don't sit on the bench, I realized I was sitting on the bench. And so when I thought about that, I said, oh, so many people would be so happy to have this job. And I finally said, fine, then one of them can have it because it doesn't make me happy. And so it was a really clear, easy decision that I was done sitting on the bench, waiting for coach to put me in. I was going to go start my own league and create my own team that I thought mattered. And I really at the time just felt like I was giving something up because I didn't know what I was going to. I just knew I was leaving something that checked all of these boxes. And it was scary, but I did not regret it. And it led to an amazing next chapter that never could have happened if I'd been sort of clinging to the mediocrity of sitting on the bench saying, oh, coach, put me in, please. Like, I have skills. And so that's one that's been a core principle that I've never regretted making a decision through, but it has always been sort of scary to do it. And that's where make decisions from a place of empowerment, not fear, is a good sort of supporting secondary one for that, is because often the decision not to sit on the bench or the decision to take up space by speaking my truth, claiming something I want, is scary. And so making decisions from a place of fear, oh, what if I can't get another remote job in this environment? What if I can't get a job that pays as well? What if I look like a job hopper, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Those are all from a place of fear. And when I run decisions through a place of empowerment, what's the answer? That's never led me wrong. Never led me wrong. It's scary in the moment, but it's never led me wrong. And that's where I and also complementary, making decisions from a place of internal fulfillment, not external validation, really core for jobs. I've always been pretty career oriented. And so breaking out of this performance workism has been important. So lots of things have been, oh, it looks good on a resume. It'll be a stepping stone to something else that will make me happy. All of this deferred gratification has just not been worthwhile. And so making those decisions through that, that's the third principle. And then taking up space is one that's been really, really hard for me, of wanting to just, I'm the oldest daughter. And so it's just like, oh, I want everyone to be happy and like have what they need. And yes, I can serve. Yes, I can help. Let me just fit in and just really anticipate needs. It's really hard to disappoint a lot of people around you. And for a long time, I felt like, oh, if I could just disappoint myself, I can take it. I'm just one person. It's fine. Like, I don't want to disappoint the people around me, my coworkers, my husband, my family. They're counting on me. They need something from me. So I would rather disappoint myself or even not even articulate to myself, not even admit to myself that I'm giving something up in service of these other things. So I wasn't even willing to express to myself that these were goals. And when I became willing to do that, willing to articulate really what my needs are, what my wants were, not sort of, oh, I don't really want that. Like, no, I don't want that. Like, oh, because that would make somebody else uncomfortable. Once I stopped doing that, I really came to appreciate the longest relationship I'm ever going to have is with myself. Every other relationship started after, will end, isn't 24/7. I have a 24/7 lifelong relationship with myself, and habitually disappointing myself is just not acceptable. So taking up space is my way of articulating, maybe I'm not going to get groceries, do the dishes, etc. Something that felt like service of others. It was my obligation to make sure things were humming in service of doing improv late, etc. And I have found that it isn't actually disappointing anyone. It makes me a lot happier. My husband doesn't care. Like, I had the standard of like, oh, I have to anticipate that the pantry's stocked with all the things you want. He doesn't care if we don't have his favorite protein bars for a day. I felt like a failure because I was like, oh, I didn't anticipate. He truly is fine and doesn't care and doesn't notice and will figure it out. And so all of these things, I was just putting all this pressure on myself to like anticipate everybody else's needs. I was pretty bad at it. Like I don't know what other people want. I'm just putting all this energy into guessing and they don't actually want it. And so I'm burning myself out and not spending time on things that would make me more energized and easier to be around. From the self-inflicted sense that I owe other people things that they don't think I owe them, that's where take up space came from.
Let's go back to this phrase, weaponized gratitude, because I think that's, you've got a wonderful way of encapsulating, I think, where so much of what we're led to believe around gratitude can take us. And I think you've really hit on something there that I think is really powerful. Let's unpack that phrase for me, weaponized gratitude.
Yeah, let's do it. As far as I know, I came up with it. I haven't come across it anywhere else. But when I was doing all of this mindfulness research, wellness research, I was just reading hundreds and hundreds of books over the course of these years and just found people would say 3 things you're grateful for, meditate. And not having the nuance of really how to do it well led me to interpret it through my westernized culture, which I realized was often comparative. And so I'll give you an example of where I've started to realize, essentially, in short, weaponized gratitude. I think anything that inherently invokes a comparison has the potential to be weaponized, especially if that comparison is external. And so I was peeling an orange one day as a snack, and I was like, okay, I should be mindful. Let's do it. So I said, okay, I'm so grateful to have this organic, fresh food in my house and all the food I'll ever need. Most people don't. And that started this shame spiral of like, oh, I have so many things that other people don't. Scurvy was an issue. I'll never have rickets. Like, it started this really perverse, like, oh, my life is so good. Do I even deserve to be unhappy about anything? Like, and it was draining. Like, it was a counterproductive thought that, I don't know, sort of felt virtuous. Like, oh, look at me, aware of my privilege. Like, who was I helping? Nobody. So it threatened to like just go down this really de-energizing spiral of self-loathing. But I interrupted it. I replaced it. I was like, okay, no, I am so grateful to have this orange as part of my life. The atoms that comprised it have existed since the dawn of the universe and will always exist. I'm so grateful to be part of something bigger than myself and connected to all of this. And that sparked a gratitude, appreciation that really was uplifting. And so I came to really notice how weaponized a lot of this gratitude was. Or I'd go on a hike and be like, oh man, I'm so grateful that I can hike. Look at me. I have the privilege of a day off of work on a weekend, and I live in a place with fresh air. And like, it just started this shame spiral of like, I'm so grateful that I can hike, which was comparative, versus like, I'm so grateful to have peace in this moment, doing something I enjoy with somebody I care about. Just anything that is inherently comparative, I've started interrupting, because I do think that often just saying, list 3 things you're grateful for made me feel worse, because I was like, well, do I have the right to feel bad about anything at all? And that was just not helpful. And I see this a lot in just any quick, like the snapshot version of good advice, the snapshot advice to meditate, the snapshot advice to do whatever. If we don't have the nuance of applying it through our cultural lens, I think it's easy to get that a little off. And so, yeah, that's what I think of as weaponized gratitude. And I think it's often used to sort of guilt ourselves, but also others. Like,
good point.
Oh, she's depressed. Like, her life's so good. Why is she depressed? You know, and so I think that anything that invokes a sense of comparison or judging emotions or validating emotions or opinions is weaponized.
I wonder if we can get a bit tactical and understand what we can do to help people break the loop, because I see, and I'm sure you do, we will have seen through the course of our working lives, those not even necessarily what we might determine as high performers. I think people generally are stuck in this pseudo-productivity day in, day out. Mm-hmm. How do we help them break the loop? Is there a micro decision, if you like, that first micro decision that you would recommend a stuck high performer, a stuck anyone for that matter, should make?
Yeah. So if you're a stuck high performer, you're talking about in a split micro moment, what can we do to see if we're in pseudo-productivity and get out of it?
Yeah.
So I would start with articulating the most important thing to get done that day, and then ask yourself if you're on track to do it. If not, why not? The why not, I think, reveals a lot of the pseudo-productivity. Why not? I have to answer all these emails. Do you? Could you batch them at the end of the day? And then you're teaching people how to interact with you, right? So if people are used to getting responses in 10 minutes, you've taught people how to treat you, how to expect. No one else is going to appreciate your strategic time blocks more than you do. So it's just a retraining. So I think if you're in a pseudo-productivity trap, you've done that audit, what's the single most important thing to get done this week, this day? Am I on track? If not, why not? That why not is probably self-inflicted and probably really easy to shift. And so why not? Oh, I have all these meetings scattered throughout my day, and so it's interrupting my focus blocks. Batch them. I like batching similar tasks. So batch meetings. I'd rather have meetings with about 15-minute break, and this is my meeting day or block of 4 hours in this day, because then the rest of that day is protected deep flow, deep work time. No exceptions. People respect it more, you get more done, you feel more energized, your work is better. So it's just compounding benefits. The why not for the pseudo-productivity, if you're not on track to getting done what you want, is usually very controllable if you tell yourself it is. And that's where the micro moment practice keeps coming into compounding benefits, is when you feel more and more agency over how you spend all of your time. It compounds into more and more agency out of this learned helplessness of like, oh, but I have to, my boss needs X. I am sure if you were to say, hey, boss, I'd be more effective this week if I could do this. Great. They want your results. And so just really auditing, what have you actually meaningfully gotten done in the last week? Was it moving the needle of where you want to go? If not, why not? And you can separate that into today, the next week, the last week. I have thoughts about the saying that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, but the nuance isn't important. I think for the sake of this question, am I in pseudo-productivity? Just audit the last week, the last day, the last 2 weeks. Are you on track to getting done what you want to? If not, why not? And then tackling that. I think if you've articulated your goal, your single priority, it wasn't until very recently that priorities could even be plural. Prior was the first thing to get done. So the idea that you have priorities means they're competing. So it's a pretty recent phenomenon to think that you could have more than one thing to do first. You're in control of that. Change it. Own that. That's fine. So I think that that's just really controllable. And then if you've articulated that's your priority and your goal, and you've articulated an acceptable mistake, and this is what I see people skipping a lot of, is it's easy to not know what good looks like, what done looks like, what your definition of success is, if you haven't articulated an acceptable mistake. And this was really important for me leading marketing teams, is oftentimes we would see things like, oh no, we can't launch this new product this quarter. And then if I dug into why not? Well, we couldn't do everything that we had to make it high quality and do all the other things we have to do. Okay. The acceptable mistake is we're going to skimp on some of the market research to ship it more quickly. And no one's going to look bad because of it. Or the acceptable mistake is we're just going to ignore PR this quarter because this is a bigger focus. I often find this I can't comes from we haven't articulated the acceptable mistake. What's okay to do mediocrely? Your house can be a mess this week. I don't know, you don't walk the dog as much. Like there's some acceptable mistake that you could skimp on this week to get your priority done. And if you don't know what it is, you're probably allocating attention to something that doesn't matter and isn't moving the needle. If you do those two things, I don't see how you could be stuck in pseudo-productivity.
I think this is such an important point at the point at which we find ourselves from a technology perspective. Because my sense, if we look at the potential that, and I think genuinely we're barely scratching the surface with AI, but if we look at the potential that AI has, that AI affords us when it comes to productivity, and I think particularly for those, if you're stuck in pseudo productivity, if you're very, very task focused, arguably if your work is very task based, then so much of that task is going to get outsourced over time. So if you look at how you protect your place in the world, increasingly the reward is going to come in deep work, is my sense. The value add, the areas in which you can truly move the needle are going to become ever more essential. So I would implore anybody listening to this to really think about acceptable mistakes, to really think about how they're using micro moments in the course of their day, to really think about their priority during the course of their day, because eventually technology is going to take away much of the stuff we do. And actually we're going to become, I think the more AI becomes AI, the more human we become. And that's where we can create some enormous value. And that's why I think this conversation, A, is fascinating, but B, I think is crucially important, because we're at this critical flexion point where we're starting to question, what does the future of employment look like? And where is our place within it? And I think understanding some of the critical things you're talking about today in terms of the behaviors that we impart every day, we've got to get really laser focused on this stuff, is my view.
I couldn't agree more. I am so excited for what AI holds, and also very aware that we can't predict it. We have no idea what will be possible or exist 5 years from now. And that means I think we have to really go back to what will not change about human nature, the world, these are core principles that we can dig into now. And I completely agree that deep, meaningful, strategic output is the way.
What's one question people should ask you, Rebecca, but never do?
That's such a good question. I guess the question that's coming to mind is one that people do ask me, which maybe is don't think of the pink elephant. People often ask if I could give my 30-year-old self a piece of advice, what would it be? Or what's a piece of advice that changed the way you think about things? I learned the phrase know your miss in disc golf. Disc golf was a COVID hobby I picked up. And the idea is that if you often miss your shot, I'm sure it pertains to ball golf too, but if you often miss to the left, aim too far to the right, you're going to feel like it's weird, like it's off. But because you miss left, if you aim too far right in your mind, you'll get closer to the basket. And I think that's really something I've taken with every even just piece of self-doubt of like, am I being too X? My miss is that I tend to over-prepare, over-analyze, overthink. So if I'm doing something that feels impulsive to me, it probably isn't, because my miss is to go so far on this side. And that's been really helpful of even just like engaging with our financial advisor. I'm like, am I being too detail-oriented and persnickety? Probably, because my miss is to be super hyper laser focused. My husband calls me a bullet point person. I read all of the bullet points in the contract. I'm going to be like, bullet 17 and bullet 3 seem like they contradict. How are you even going to enforce this contract? So to him, he's like, the vibes are good, man. Like, yeah, let's do it. And so my miss, if I feel like I'm being remiss or not crossing all of my T's, probably fine. It feels weird. It feels really weird. And it's really hard to do in the moment because my instincts and my nature say I'm being negligent. But it lets me ship faster. It lets me iterate more. There's tons of benefits to spending less time pre-planning, pre-preparing, trying to control everything. And all of this control is really just a fear insecurity mechanism anyway. So just knowing my miss has let me get out of that and be much more effective.
What's a lesson you've learned the hard way that others haven't seen coming?
Yeah, I've really learned that any judgment, assessment, perception of other people is really an insecurity. If you're placing your heroes above you, this is a fear-based insecurity response. If you're judging somebody else's decisions or life, that's an insecurity about whether you're doing things well. And has really helped me relate to and understand that I cannot predict other people's perspective or choices or behavior or values, and everything they're doing is much more logical that way. And so I used to sort of think that I was being disingenuous if I didn't tell a family member that I thought they were making a mistake or something, or I didn't try. But now I've just appreciated that I can just sit with they're doing something rational from their priorities. It's not my job to fix it. And by virtue of thinking they're doing something wrong, that says more about me than about them. That's just a criticism of a reflection of how I see the world. And it's really helped me relate to everybody better. Barista, Starbucks, neighbor, everybody, coworkers, that by virtue of passing any kind of judgment, either I below my heroes or I'm right because I chose a different stroller for my baby than somebody else, and that makes me a better mom. Like, all of this is just a fear, insecurity, perfectionistic ideal or response that is super self-inflicted, entirely optional. And the idea that I think somebody else is making a mistake is saying that I have life all figured out and I know how everybody else should live, which is also ridiculous. And so it's just let me interact with my energy more positively in the world. Yeah, it's just been a lot more productive.
Rebecca, we should wrap this up. I want to thank you with my reflections on our conversations, because I think what strikes me is that you've reminded us that time isn't just a resource, but perhaps a mirror, and that how we treat the space between tasks says more about us and our leadership than any KPI or title ever could. I think the other thing that you've made evidently clear is that you've shown us that reclaiming control doesn't mean working harder. And I think that's a mistake that many of us will make. It means instead that we're designing systems that move without us, and that knowing when to let go of being essential is critical so we can start being effective. And I think you've given us language for what so many high performers feel but don't know how to name. And that's that hyper-responsiveness is not strength, but perhaps a strategy built on fear.
Yeah, it is a fear-based response.
Absolutely. And that freedom doesn't come from having more hours. It comes from owning the ones that we already have. That was something that really struck me about what you had to say.
Oh, I love the way you've wrapped that up. Can I put one little bow on that thought before we go?
Please,
I think
please
you're
do.
right. I think for high performers and leaders too, when we're worried about the big things that we may not be able to control, macroeconomic trends, AI rendering part of our business obsolete, it's really easy to let that control trickle into perfectionist tendencies of things we can control that don't matter, that burn our teams out. And so thinking about the impact of that on my team has been really important. As I've grown as a leader, I've come to appreciate that the mistake of an email campaign going out with a subject line I didn't like is much more doable for a business than hyper controlling the process so that my team doesn't feel creative or empowered anymore. And so I think there's a trade-off to everything. This hyper control, this perfectionism is really a fear-based response. And the idea that we have an idea of how everything should be done is entirely cultural. Like we are just mirroring and perceiving and reflecting things back through the cultural lens of whatever we value or see in ourselves. And that's why micro moments, I think, are so powerful, because they let you be intentional about where you're putting your energy to be more effective and align with your values. And when you value your own 5-minute gaps, you're actually casting a vote for the kind of person you want to be. And that's somebody who values their time and their brain and their potential. And that has compounding benefits beyond whatever you decide to do with that time.
Rebecca, thank you. I think importantly for listeners, there are going to be so many who are going to deeply interested in what you have to say. Where can we be sending them to find out more about you and your ideas and your writing and your thoughts? Because there's just so much here that's of enormous value, I know, to so many people.
I appreciate it. I'm most active on LinkedIn, Rebecca Shaddix on LinkedIn, and share some thoughts there. I'm also spinning up timebillionaires.org to share updates about writings, blog, podcast episodes. So you can subscribe to updates at timebillionaires.org and follow me on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. We'll make sure we put those links in the show notes. Really appreciate your time today. You've offered up some great insights. It's really thought-provoking, really compelling, and I think also uniquely tactical as well. I think that's you're not only talking about, there are clearly some hugely impactful grand concepts and ideas that you're talking about, really important subject, but also you're providing some really tactical, practical tips to people that they can employ and deploy through the course of their day-to-day that will really help them. So really appreciate you taking the time out to come on and share this with the listeners. It's been great having you on the show.
Likewise. Thanks, Lee. It's been great.
If this conversation gave you pause, clarity, or a sense of your own next move, don't let it vanish with the next notification. Share this episode with someone who's scaling but quietly stuck. Leave a review on your podcast app. It's the simplest way to help us keep this content sharp, honest, and reaching the leaders who need it most. Follow the show, subscribe on YouTube, and if you want to go deeper into themes like this, intentionality, leadership under pressure, and high-performance reinvention, check out The Signal, our Substack where we break down these insights into actionable systems. And if you're ready to build your own foundation, The Growth Founder is for strategic operators under scale pressure, and The Career Edge is for high performers ready to rebuild momentum on their own terms. Until next time, stay conscious, stay courageous, and don't just manage your time, own your edge. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.